Yo, what is going on, guys? In today's video, you're gonna learn why you've most likely been rendering your images wrong the entire time in your Next.js app. Get ready to learn something new. Roll the intro. Before we jump into today's video, it's worth mentioning that we're going to be talking about Next.js, which is a framework for a very popular library, React. If you want to go ahead and level up your skill set and get up to scratch with all the fundamentals of React in case you feel behind or in case you want to improve your skill set, make sure you don't miss out this amazing offer from our friends over at Skillshare. If that sounds pretty cool, check this out. Skillshare is an online learning community where millions of people come together to take the next step in their creative journey. The thing I love about Skillshare is that there are no ads. They're always launching new premium classes, and they also recommend really interesting classes. So before you know it, I'm actually no longer watching TV or Netflix. All I do is watch Skillshare while I'm actually eating my food. Most classes are under 60 minutes, so they should be able to fit any schedule, whether you're super busy or you've got a little bit more time on your hands. I've actually gone ahead and dropped the React Basics 101 entire class on Skillshare. The first 1,000 people to use the link in the description are going to get a free month worth of premium Skillshare, and you're going to be able to, with that, access the React Basics which I've uploaded. On top of that, you're going to get access to thousands and thousands of courses available on Skillshare's platform. I've actually been checking out an amazing video editing class at the moment by Ali Abdal, where I was actually able to find out how I could use my iPad to add animated handwriting into my videos to level up my production value. And now I'm making the best use out of my iPad, as well as leveling up my Final Cut production game. So this is just an example of the amazing value that I've got since I've signed up at Skillshare. And if you guys want to go ahead and benefit from this just like I have, then go ahead and remember, the first 1,000 people to go ahead and grab that link are going to get one free month of Skillshare Premium, which means that you can access my React Basics 101 class. It's completely free. You have nothing to lose. And then after that, you can go ahead and continue if you're enjoying what you see on Skillshare. So without further ado, let's jump into the video. The first thing I want you to do is head over to nextjs.org. This is where you're going to find the landing page for the amazing React framework that we love to use on this channel. So scroll a little bit down, and it's not long before you see the amazing image optimization. Now you're probably wondering, why do I need to change the way I render images on websites? The first thing I want you to know is that images are actually one of the biggest resources that need to be loaded when you hit a website. So when you land on a website, usually you see lots of images which are on the screen. Now, most of the time, these aren't actually rendered correctly. And if anything, they're rendered very inefficiently, which leads to your page being loaded extremely slow, or a lot slower than what it could be loaded at. So there's a lot of improvements that using something like the image component provided by the guys over at Next.js provides us. So if we go ahead and click into this, I can show you guys a few of those just to start with. So firstly, starting off with the performance boosts. By using this, you're going to massively shrink the size of each image, which means that it's going to be a lot faster to load these images. In addition, the image component only renders the images which are in the initial viewport. And as images go into the viewport, only then will it cleverly prefetch. So if it's coming to the point at which you're scrolling near to the image, at that point it will prefetch the image and show it on the screen. So this is known as lazy loading. And most of the time when we actually implement our sites, a lot of us forget to implement these kind of techniques, which improve the user experience and initial time to interactive. It's also worth mentioning that Next.js actually takes into account the height and width of the device that you're requesting the image from. What it then does is it will select the appropriate sized image. So it will actually take the original image from either a static location, so an image on your site, or from a remote location. It could be on a different server, it could be a remote URL, whatever the case, and it will actually go ahead and it will process that image and either compress it down into a smaller image size for smaller screens, or compress it and make it more readily available for larger screens. So rather than delivering these heavy types of files such as PNGs and JPEGs, we're now going to be using something called WEBP and AVIF, which are way more efficient keep most of the quality while ensuring the size of the image is massively dropped. So all of this is extremely easy to use and implement with Next.js. So diving straight in, here I have a Next.js starter template. This is ran by using the basic Create Next app, and I'm using the with Tailwind CSS template. So this has gone ahead, started things off. All I've done here is added in a few nice things over here. So we've got something to work with. So if you guys want to join us over at Zero to Full Stack Hero to learn how to code, crush your full stack career, you know where to go. Visit papareact.com. But with this screen up, we're going to go ahead and start our app with yarn run dev. So typically in an app, if I want an image, I will go ahead and use something like this, a very basic image source tag, such as this. Now hitting save, you can now see that an image is going to pop up on the screen. So quick little inspection of this image. So if I go ahead and hit full screen, I'm on Chrome right now, and I'm going to go ahead and inspect. And we're going to go over to the network tab, and I'm going to disable cache. So that way we can make sure that it's actually going to go ahead and demonstrate the effect of what we're trying to show here. So if I hit refresh, I'm going to make sure I'm only showing the images. So in this case, we're loading the JPEG. And as you can see, it's 72 kilobytes on 1.9 seconds. If I hit refresh again, you can see, okay, 47 milliseconds, it's a lot faster, but in this case, 64, 205, 38. Each time varies slightly based on my internet connection. But the point is, you might be wondering, well, that's really fast, right? Because we have nothing to compare against, it can seem very fast, right? But when we tally this up and we have, potentially, like let's imagine 10 to 20 pictures on the initial page view, that can actually add up to be quite a slow page load. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how we can make this drastically faster. First way of doing this is if we have our image on our local domain, right? So if we have a static image, in this case, I've got images / thebestcourse.jpg, and I'm going to go ahead and use an import statement. So if you want to go ahead and actually use a local image, you can import like this, and this is known as a static image import. And what you can actually do here is go ahead and use the image component. So I'm going to use the image component, which we've imported from next/image. I'm going to go ahead and say 0 to full stack hero image, right? Now, if we hit save, what we'll now see is two images very much identical because it literally is the same picture. But the difference here is seen in the time to load and the size of each image. So quick inspection, we can see that both images are of the same quality pretty much. And if we go back over here, we can see that we've got the JPEG file at 72 kilobytes and our Next.js new WebP image, which has been compressed on the Next.js server, now is loading in at 40.2 kilobytes. And that may not seem like that much difference, but look at the time that it took to load it, guys. 182 milliseconds down to 9. If I go ahead and refresh, again, 112 down to 7, again, 697, you get the sort of format here, right? It's way faster to load on the page. So that's the first way of using a Next.js image component, right? So this is great if you've got local files. However, in most cases, we tend to sort of use a URL to pull in our images and so forth. And this is known as when we use a remote image. So how do I do that? Well, let's assume that we were going to use the same image here, right? Well, in fact, what we have to do here is do one of two things. Firstly, we provide the source, and this is going to be to an external URL. The second thing is we have to actually tell it or tell Next.js the height and width of this image. Now you're probably wondering, well, Sonny, you didn't do that before when you used a local image. Well, that's because when we have a local image, when it actually optimizes and builds the bundle, when it's at build time or when we're developing at runtime, then it's essentially going to know what the height and width is because we have access to the file. When we're pulling from a remote URL, Next.js doesn't know the height and width to expect. So it doesn't know how to handle that file. So what we have to do is provide that so that way it can then go ahead and compress it and make the appropriate, more efficient images. What we're going to now do is go ahead and put in a height of 1080 and a width of 1920 to keep a nice aspect ratio. And if I go ahead and hit save, you might be wondering that it's going to work, but you're going to run into this issue. And this is where it goes ahead and says that you need to go ahead and essentially whitelist the domain name. Now, the reason why you need to go ahead and actually allow certain URLs to be processed by our Next.js server is because it actually takes a little bit of work from our server to go ahead and process these images and make them compressed down and actually efficiently deliver them. If we allow every single domain, it's gonna essentially open up our website to getting stressed out in the event that a malicious user tries to take advantage of that and upload massively huge files if there was an entry point in our app to do so. This can cause a lot of issues. So what we have to do is essentially tell Next.js which domains we are allowing. So we head over to Next.js next.config.js, and here we simply go ahead and we add in the images key, which takes an object. We add in the domains key, and this will take an array, of URLs. So in this case, I'm going to say links.papareact.com. Hit save, and then what you now need to do is it will say found a change in the config file, so you have to restart your server. That's a normal step. Whenever you have changes to your Next config file or your environment files, you're going to have to restart your server. Okay, so with that done now, if I go ahead and hit refresh, what we'll see is two images got loaded onto the screen. And this is exactly as we saw it before. You can see it's still much smaller and it works in the way that we expected it. Okay, so that's the first way in which you can go ahead and render things in with a height and width. But what if you don't know what the height and width is? What if you want a more, responsive, dynamic approach to styling? Well, you can use height and width, or you can use layout equals fill. What this will do is it will essentially become the size of the parent component. So without additional preparation, this won't look as you expect it to. So if I hit save now, it's going to actually take up the entire screen, because what's happening here is, if we look at this, the parent is the surrounding div, and this entire thing is basically saying you should fill up your parent. So what you need to do when you have layout fill is essentially wrap it inside of a parent container. And in this case, we're going to use a div, and I'm going to go ahead and use Tailwind CSS utility class names, because we set up with Tailwind CSS. Otherwise, you could use regular CSS. I'm going to go ahead and set the container to be relative. Now what's happening is it's saying fill up the size that you have relative to this parent container. So if we now go ahead and say this was a height of, let's say, 64 by a width of, let's say, 96, it's going to be super skewed, and I'll show you how to fix it in a second. Let's go ahead and hit save. You'll now see that we get this come onto the screen, right? So it's a little bit stretched out, looks funky, but it's still loading something on the screen. We're not getting that nasty error that we got before. So what you now can do to fix this is you can use something, and typically in CSS, what you would have used is object fit contain or object fit cover or something like that. Well, they've actually gone ahead and given this inside of the image component. So we can type in object fit equals, and if you do control spacebar, you'll get all the options that you can see here. So if we do contain, as you can see, if I use object contain, object fit contain, it will say it'll keep the aspect ratio. If I do object fit cover, it will attempt to use that full space, but it will actually go ahead and spread the image out in regards to size and retain the sizing as so. Right, but in this case, I tend to go for contain to make sure my images aren't hidden away. So this is the second approach you can do. So the first one was the height and width. The second was using layout fill surrounded in a relative div or relative parent container. So I'm now going to demonstrate another example of where Next.js comes in extremely powerful. Above, we have the non-optimized image. So it's going to be the regular image, which is wrapped around a red border so we can identify it. The second is a Next.js image component, which is going to go ahead and have layout fill. So it's going to dynamically size itself up to a height of 96. Okay, but what it will do amazingly here is it will go ahead and actually check what screen size is the request being made from, and then only request the screen size, or only request the image which is appropriate for that screen size to reduce the image size that comes in. So I open up Chrome. At the top here, you can see we've got this device toolbar. This allows me to handily make requests based on screen size. So if I go ahead and make this a little bit bigger, we can see we can pull in a laptop size and so forth. life. So the first test I want to do is move over to a mobile, a very small mobile. If I hit refresh, we can see we've got the JPEG image at 72.5 and we've got a relatively small WebP image at 19.7. Clicking into this, we can see that it has a payload. Now the JPEG, regardless of what size screen that we render from, will always load the full image, whereas the same image passed through the image component. As you can see, it passes in a width of 640 and 75. At this point, it's saying that it's a relatively small screen. So what it's going to do is Next.js is going to prepare this image for a small screen. But what if we either start off on a bigger screen or if we end up resizing upwards? Well, notice as I resize upwards, it's going to make an additional request and replace the image with the new image or the next bigger screen size. And if I keep doing this, guys, it's really amazing how it works. So you see how it's literally increasing the size of the image and replacing it, so that way you will never see a smaller or more pixelated image. What it's doing is it's as if you were to resize the screen, for example, as we're doing now. Only at the time that you need that bigger image will it pull it in. It will fetch it in and it will swap it. You wouldn't even realize it happened. So you can see at this point, we can make sure that we're not using unnecessary bandwidth. So you can see the original images that came in 19.7 slowly got bigger as I went a bit bigger. But if I went ahead and just pulled in right now, refresh, you can see it pulled in from a screen size of assuming that we're on a little bit of a larger screen. Okay, but initially what we're saying here is that irrelevant of how many times you pull this in, it's still going to be smaller than our initial JPEG image, right? So these WebP format images are way more efficient, way faster to deliver as well. And even if we start on a larger screen, you can see that it's going to go ahead and pass in those parameters. So in this case, it's prepared and told Next.js that we're actually requesting this from a large screen. So give me a high resolution version of the image, which again would still be way more optimal than the original JPEG image. So a bonus point here that we actually have for Next.js is, so what if the image is right at the top? It's the biggest thing that we're going to see. And sometimes I don't even want to see this little flicker. So sometimes you might notice that there's this little flicker when I refresh the page. Next.js give us this awesome attribute called priority. Now, whenever you've got an image which is going to be shown at the immediate viewpoint, so we're talking like a banner, we're talking something which is immediately going to be put in front of your user, you want to be using this priority property. So I'm going to demonstrate this right now. And as you can see, we previously had that slight jitter right over here. So it was a slight bit of jitter. Now, if I go ahead and actually put in priority like so, because this is going to be one of the first things we're going to see on the screen, I want this to be relatively fast. Now, if I refresh, notice how there is absolutely zero jittering behavior here, right? So it's literally, we've told it that it's a priority image. So what Next.js will do is it will prepare the entire page so that we eradicate that. And also it will also make sure that if I was to go ahead and demonstrate this with the previous image and remain to have priority here, this will be the first image which the request gets called for. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger and request. Now you can see that our request up here is the absolute first request. Even if there was 100 pictures on the page, this one would always be the first request because it's now got the priority. It is also possible to use, so here we're using absolute URLs. It's also possible to use something called relative URLs. So imagine if the image or the file name was simply D7L, or if it was simply banner image, right? So imagine it was something like this, banner, right? You can actually do that with relative URLs. Now, what you will need to do in order to get this working is use something called a loader. If we want to go ahead and serve our images directly from a CDN or an image server, we can actually use one of the many built-in loaders that they offer over at Next.js, such as Cloudinary, Akamai, Vercel, and so forth. I've actually used Cloudinary before, and what it's amazing for is, let's imagine I have an image which needs to be upscaled to a very large, for example, 4K or 8K screen. What Cloudinary does is it will essentially take a lower resolution image. Imagine that was our absolute max resolution that we could get, and it can actually upscale upwards based on those requests that I previously showed you. So this actually works out really powerful if this is something that you want to do, if you don't always have the highest resolution assets to begin with. But Guys, as you know, I love to deploy it with Vercel because it's made with from the guys over at Next.js, and that actually works automatically when you deploy. You don't even have to configure it. Automatically get all the benefits, including serving the assets from the local edge network over at Vercel. So really lots and lots of benefits here to using the Next.js image component. With that said, let's summarize the benefits of using the Next.js image component as opposed to the regular HTML image component. Well, for one, the images are going to be drastically smaller by using much better file formats such as WEBP and AVIF. WebP is now an actual really good standard on the web. It keeps the quality very high and it ensures that the file size remains smaller. AVIF is for those of you who want to include things like HDR image content or 10-bit image content, as WebP is limited to 8-bit images. So that's something, if you need to factor it in, Next.js actually support AVIF now, so it's something to look into. In addition, once we have all of our images massively being optimized like this, the time to interactive is going to be much less on the website, which means that our pages for our users are going to be much faster to load. Things like lazy loading, prefetching, all of this is baked straight into the image component. So that way you're not making these mistakes of forgetting to implement it and so forth. The only time that I would recommend that you may not be able to use Next.js image optimization is if you do not know or trust the domains that you're pulling from. So if we have dynamic data where we don't have the URLs, or we can't trust the URLs always that we're pulling the information from, this is somewhere where I would recommend to be cautious with Next.js image optimization, as remember, you'll need to be whitelisting the domains before you use them. This is why in some of my builds, I have not used the Next.js image optimization for the dynamic content. With that said, guys, I hope you've learned something new here. Smash the thumbs up button if any of this was relevant to you and it improved your skill set in the Next.js space. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Over 50% of you aren't actually subscribed, and it's blowing my mind because the PAPAFAM is growing day by day and you guys are incredible with your support. And as always, guys, drop a comment if you found this useful and what you want me to make videos on next, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.